Morning, everyone. Hello. So we're going to be discussing Rishi Sunak's latest abject performance yesterday. Now, I've actually done a video on it for my own channel as well because it was quite remarkable. There were lots of bits to it. But so I want to go through a couple of things. First of all, there were two parts to his performance yesterday. So he's been on holiday. He went on holiday to Disneyland. And then he came back and decided to immediately go and speak to the public. Now, this has never gone well before. If we go through some of his highlights, he once went to a petrol station. This was as Chancellor, and he wanted to be filmed filling up a car, but he couldn't fill up his own car. It's far too posh. So he borrowed an ordinary car from like someone who just worked at Sainsbury's there. Said, "Can I fill up your car? I will pay for the petrol." They went, "Yeah, sure, why not?" So he filmed himself filling up someone else's car, and then tried to pay for the petrol by scanning a can of Coke he hadn't even paid for yet. And the guys go, "No, you have to scan your card. That's how payment works." So the Chancellor didn't actually know how a credit card works. That was good. Then his late was asking a homeless man if he worked in finance. That was also an interesting one. So you're trying to look for example, like when you're trying to look for when people will say things like, "How can we be so sure Labour will win the next election?" Yeah, it's looking good, but they've had this situation before where they looked good in the polls and it's all gone to hell. 1992, 2015, nothing's the same. And this is just another one. You've got Rishi Sunak when he has to actually go. Yesterday, hardly anyone saw it because people on holiday, the World Cup's on, all the rest of it. Hardly anyone saw his performance. Come the general election, everyone's interested, because they're going to decide how to use their vote. They want to listen to Keir Starmer. They want to listen to Rishi Sunak. They want to hear what they've got to say. So every time there's an interview, a lot of people will be watching it, right? You think to yourself, he's been Prime Minister for about 10 months now, just shy of 10 months. And actually, no, is it? About 10 months. And you think, right, okay, so what has he done in that time? Because that's what he's going to announce yesterday, isn't it? He's going to talk about all the things he's done. Now, he just came up with a load of excuses. And one of his excuses, which is what I referred to on the thumbnail to this video, is at one point he said, "I've only been in politics for 7 years." And it's like, mate, you've been an MP for 8 years. How's that work? Mr. Maths till 18. How does that work? And if you think, oh, I'm just picking here because he just made a little error. He didn't make a little error. It's not a difficult subtraction. It's not like when you've got, like when someone's got a job, they've been working at a company for a while, and you go, "How long you've been working there?" And you've got to think, well, when did I start? I can't remember, because it's not notable. But he became an MP at a general election. We all know when the general elections were. The one he was elected at was 2015. It's not difficult. So it means either he has no attention to detail, or he doesn't care if what he's saying is even accurate. Because remember, he planned it. He planned that. He didn't just randomly turn up at a tile place to buy some tiles and they all said, "Oh, Prime Minister, will you give us a speech?" You know, he planned it. He planned what to say. So it's and the other thing about it is, "Oh, I've only been in politics for 7 years," as if it's an excuse. It's like, well, if you're trying to suggest you're not experienced enough to do the job, why did you do it? You chose to do it. No one made you do it. No one made you become an MP. You chose to do it. Absolutely appalling. Let's go through a few comments before I go into the next bit, because there were several aspects to his performance yesterday which are noteworthy. I noticed how the pre-2015 campaign doesn't get counted as being in politics either. Did the Conservative Party say, "Hague is stepping down, get me Sunak"? So, yeah, it's... well, no. So, see, I can accept as well being in politics. You may just mean being employed in politics. I'm fine with him saying from 2015 there. But in all honesty, yeah, you're right. Before he was elected, he had to have been made the candidate. That would have been some time before. He must have been a member of the local Conservative Party. So he must have been in politics. But I'm fine with him defining it as working in politics. Like, all it means is he wasn't a councillor beforehand or anything like that. A lot of MPs have been councillors beforehand. I'm okay with that. But the fact that he'd been an MP for 8 years, but reckons he's only been in politics for 7, it's like, well, what were you doing as your first year as MP then? because he was doing things. He was, for example, paying for him to have lower taxes. He voted in favor of lower corporation tax, which helped him. How can all of those people sit there and not shout at him? Statistically, some of them want to. If he came into where I worked, it would. I would not be able to tell them to piss off to California now. Well, because their bosses will have told them not to. See, I know this. I've seen this scene before because I've been a teacher, you see. And it's the same thing. You have a guest speaker coming in and your students go, oh, we've got this guest speaker coming in. Who is it? Oh, it's this guy who works at like this company. Oh, we're not interested in that. Well, you've got to go and listen to them anyway. I don't want to. Sit down. Don't make a fuss. Look interested. Ask a question at the end. Oh, we'll think of any questions. I'll give you a question to ask, right? You know, so I've seen that look. But he did it at the same. He like gave a speech. He's doing this thing. He goes to like companies and talks to the workers so that he's talking to the public. And the reason he's doing it is because it's control. So when you're saying, oh, what's stopping them shouting out? Their bosses are telling them not to shout anything out. That's what he's doing it for. He's not going out to the general public because then he's got no control over that. Like, he won't do something like this where there might be general members of the public just walking past. He's doing it in a controlled environment. So it's like, it looks like it's to the public because they're ordinary members of the public, but it's in a controlled environment where they're not allowed to shout things out or ask awkward questions because their bosses will say, don't cause a fuss. Sunak should be encouraged to make as many public appearances as possible. Surely the people realize just how bad the Tories are. I'm amazed he's been allowed to do these at all because he's not improving. Like, he should have used that. He should have used that to practice. We should have gone in and thought to ourselves, right, these are the things I need to work on for my pitch because come the general election, I'm going to be right in the middle of the crucible. I'm going to be in the spotlight. I need to make sure my patter's really good. So I'm going to get better at it. That's what he should have done. You know, I did a similar thing when I went to university. So I went to university specifically to become a science teacher. So I knew, obviously, becoming a science teacher, I was going to, you know, have to be able to speak in front of people. And I was, at the time, very shy. Now, I actually, ironically, wasn't afraid to stand up and talk in front of people. Even though I was painfully shy, I was still able to talk in front of very large crowds. But I still thought to myself, I need to be, there's like a barrier there when you just stood in front of a crowd of people. Whereas as a teacher, you're going around the place. And I thought, So I deliberately tried to address, you know, like flaws in my character, which would be a barrier to that because I'm like an incredibly introverted person. Like, he should have done the same thing. He should have got people to say, look, where am I going wrong with my pitch? What am I messing up? Make a list. Every time we go to do another appearance, I'm going to work on one of them and make it better. Like, even Keir Starmer has improved his speeches, the way he delivered. If you look at his speech, if you look at like Labour Party speeches, if you look at the 2021 conference compared to the 2022 conference, there's a significant improvement. He's never going to be a great orator. Neither is Rishi Sunak. But that they can. Tops Towels might just view it as free advertising. Or maybe, you know, the owner is a Tory donor or something. I also don't think poorly of them. People are saying, oh, so Tops Towels are Tories then. I'm not really into that. I don't mind if a business owner supports a particular party or something, that's fine. I'm okay. Tops Towel share price is down this morning now. I'm not mean like that. If a company owner is obnoxiously political, that's different. So the likes of Tim Martin of Wetherspoons, for example, yes. But in terms of companies in general, like, you know, I go to the local butchers here sometimes, very nice pork burgers. I don't ask them what their political views are. If I found out they were a Tory, as most people around here are, wouldn't stop me going there. Same with the Green Ghost or something like that. Stop giving Sunak advice. He might start listening. No, he won't listen. And I'll tell you why. If he already has access to top advisors. If he wants, he's got the money. It's our money. If he wants top advisors, he can get them, right? The fact that he's not improving means he doesn't have them. And if he doesn't have them, it's because he doesn't want them. Rishi Sunak does not want advisors who will be honest with him and improve his performances. So if he actively doesn't want to like hire advisors who will do that, he's certainly not going to listen to me, who is openly a political opponent of his. So Sunak is not going to take any advice that I give. He will, I doubt he even thinks he's doing anything wrong. I really don't believe he thinks he's doing anything wrong. Because if you look at his body language is actually, I'm not just meaning this photo. I mean, I watched like clips of what he was saying. His body language was actually quite confident. He didn't look like, you know, and that to me is someone who thinks they're doing well. His body language was, to me, of someone who thought he was putting in a decent performance. So he has no, if I say that performance was abject, he's going, what are you on about, mate? You're just saying that because you're Labour. Attendees at these things never look engaged, prove positive they've been told sit down, shut up. Yeah. I mean, to be fair, I don't pick too much on that. I don't imagine the same would be any different if Keir Starmer or Ed Davey were doing it, because they have been told to. That's what I mean about the controlled environment. They've been told to just stand there and say it. I mean, I've seen, to be fair, photos of Keir Starmer where he's got like young, and they're Labour activists behind him, and sometimes they don't always look that interested. At the end of the day, a speech is a speech, and not everyone likes listening to speeches. But you know, like, so in terms of, so let's go through a few of the things he said. So first of all, I've only been in politics for 7 years, or 8 years if you actually did do maths to 18 like I did. As if to say, well, I'm too inexperienced. Well, don't do the job then. Another thing he said, oh, I inherited a mess, you know. No. You were the Chancellor in 2020. You were the Chancellor in 2021. You were the Chancellor in 2022. You don't get to say you inherited a mess. Liz Truss blew a hole in our finances, granted, but you don't get to blame everything on her. Also, the cost of living crisis was biting to the point where it was headline news before Boris Johnson stood down. Well, he was still Chancellor. There was a cost of living crisis. Gary Arnold, £2 super chat. Thank you very much. All very helpful, by the way. It's pretty much the only money we get here. Sunak is a man who has never knowingly failed. Until he takes an actual setback, he won't change. I agree completely. This is the problem. I'm not someone who says we should ban people with these sort of backgrounds from politics. But if you had a sensible political system, we wouldn't have that many. There's something like 10% of the population have had private education, but it's like 2/3 to 3/4 of the cabinet. No, that's not right. It wouldn't even matter to me if the Prime Minister was privately educated, as long as the bulk of the cabinet weren't, because the bulk of the cabinet would be saying, that is not how life works, Prime Minister. So we would at least having people telling him otherwise. Guardi as well, £2 super chat, thank you very much. The audience in that photo reminds me of the episode when The Simpsons, where Mr. Byrne runs for governor and Lisa Simpson's forced to take a sycophantic question. To ask a sycophantic question. Yes, I remember. Well, that's how it is. I mean, that was a school thing as well. Students having to listen to someone who was boring them. I've seen it before. You know, it's just what it is. But he's not there to entertain as such. But the problem is, he wasn't saying to them what he'd done. He's had 10 months. He's been Chancellor for 2.5 years, and then Prime Minister for nearly a year, right? Why wasn't he able to say, we did this and it made your life better? The reason is because their life hasn't been made better in any way. Like, in any way. It's not like there's been no net improvement in people's lives. In no facet of people's lives is it better now than when he became Prime Minister or when he became Chancellor. People's lives are worse. So he can't say, we've done this, it made your life better. So instead, he reverts to excuses. He's not even able to say what he's going to do to make their life better. Because this comes to, so after this public speech, right, he did an interview with Robert Peston of ITV, right? So Rishi Sunak's hailing the lower inflation figures. He'll probably go quiet next month when they go up again, but never mind that. Robert Peston said to him something more journalists should say, and it's not even like Robert Peston's the good one. You know, he can be a bit sycophantic at times. But Robert Peston said to him, the inflation figures are nothing to do with you because none of your policies help reduce it. He says there are things you could do to reduce inflation, but you're not doing it. And Rishi Sunak said, yes, but it's because of what I've not been doing. He said, I could have made it worse, you know. He literally said, right, he said, I could have made inflation worse by borrowing for tax cuts. It's like, so we're supposed to be grateful that he did nothing because apparently the only alternative to doing nothing was to make it worse. How offensive is that? And it got worse as well. He got worse in this interview, which I'll try and make sure we put a link to the report on the interview in the comments below for later, in the description below, sorry, for later. But he said, right, I'm not kidding. He said, I'm suffering political pain for this. It's like, there are people out there, like he is worth 250 million pounds. His wife is worth like double that. His father-in-law is one of the richest billionaires in India, right? Okay. He is never, ever, ever not going to be able to pay the bills. If he didn't earn a single penny for the rest of his life, he can live a life of luxury, not just comfort, luxury. And yet there are people out there saying, that cannot afford the basic standard of living. They can't afford to always cook because they may be able to afford the food and then they can't afford the heating to cook the food, the gas or the electricity. Or in winter, they have to choose between heat and heating. These are working people as well. Not that anyone should have to suffer that, but working people, like where you've got a household where both people work full time, this is the life for them. They can't afford what they could afford years ago. They're doing the same work. They're just as productive, right? These workers are being just as productive as they were 5 years ago, and yet they cannot afford the same standard of living. That can't be their fault because they're working just as hard. And Rishi Sunak says to them, yes, you may be starving, but I'm suffering political pain, you know. And you think, what on earth is he going to do in the general election? So if anyone, I mean, right, the Labour leadership, of course, cannot be complacent. But I've said for the longest time now that I sort of am a bit, because as long as Labour focus, as long as Labour MPs keep their head down and keep their eyes on the prize, as long as the Labour leadership keeps focus, Labour are going to smash it. Because I could go through a list of reasons why the Conservatives are not going to come back from this. And one of them, the one today, is that Rishi Sunak cannot engage with the public. He absolutely cannot engage with the public. You know, he's come up with excuses. He's saying, I'm suffering. Why are you moaning about the suffering? You don't even know what suffering is. You've just got empty bellies. I'm suffering political pain, you know. Yeah, it's almost like, do you know how it feels for someone as rich as me, who could be making an absolute fortune outside of politics, to be giving up my time to put my feet up doing nothing for you and suffering political pain as well? There's me doing nothing to help inflation, but I could be making it worse. At least I'm not making it worse. And you're not applauding me. The polls, have you seen the polls? I'm suffering political pain. And this is why, like, he's not going to take my advice. His advice, he has advisors. He will be meeting with them today, or he'll have met with them last night. There will have been a debrief on this thing that happened yesterday. And do you know something? Not one single one of those advisors is saying to him, Prime Minister, that was rubbish. Let's go through all the things you did wrong, because that cannot happen again. That's not happening. These advisors aren't saying that. His advisor going, oh, well done, Prime Minister. You came across very well then. Terribly well done. Well done. He's surrounded by yes men. There can be no other explanation for his complete lack of progress. He's not getting any better. Like, Rishi Sunak, very bad at public engagements. Keir Starmer, it's not a strength of his. But I've seen Keir Starmer at least get better. He's identified he needs to get better, and he has done so. Rishi Sunak is not. And if anything, he's getting worse because he's getting more defensive. The excuses, you need to consider my suffering. Anyway, Plumdale saying, my job's been merged with 2 others. Oh, what fun doing 3 people's work for no extra pay. Oh, yeah, I mean, but you're making a mistake. This is the mistake you're making. What you should be doing is getting rich by taking other people's money and gambling with it, like he did. That's how he made his money. He gambled with other people's money. And whenever he won, he got to keep it. And whenever he lost, someone else paid for it. But anyway, Graham's there saying they bring back the Maybot. Seriously, here's the thing. So everyone just assumes, and it's not an unfair assumption, by the way, that so the polls are as they are. Hopefully, Labour maintain this poll rating right to the general election. Rishi Sunak at some point is forced to go to the polls, at which point we just assume that the polls will narrow, and there's lots of good reasons to suppose they will narrow a bit, just not enough. I mean, Labour have got more than a large enough lead to get a healthy majority. They don't need a majority of like 200. That'd be ridiculous. So, but here's the thing. Theresa May in 2017 went in thinking, oh, we're ahead in the polls, we'll do all right here. And they narrowed the other way. They narrowed the other way because Theresa May, her performances were abject. We may get the same from Rishi Sunak. I'm looking at Rishi Sunak and thinking, if you do that when there's millions of voters watching, because here's the thing, if you're a swing voter particularly, you're absolutely going to watch those interviews, aren't you? Like there's maybe lots of us who already know how we're going to vote because we just habitually vote that way, we've already made our minds up anyway, whatever. But there will be plenty of swing voters in that election who are not sure. So what do you do if you're not sure? Well, you're going to listen to the political leaders, aren't you? So when there's an interview on the telly, you'll watch it. When there's like some public event, you'll look at the report of it. So people are going to start looking at him in a way they're not at the moment. They're not at the moment because it doesn't really matter. For people who will vote but are not interested in politics, it's like it doesn't matter. But in the election, it will. He needs to. If I was a Conservative MP, I would be hammering on his door saying, you need to get better at this because that was shit. John Bull, £5 super chat, thank you very much, says, wonder if Sunak will dare go on Channel 4 during the campaign. Johnson ducked it. Sunak has to. So Johnson, you're right, did duck. He ducked at least 2 television interviews, debates, and 1 interview with Andrew Neil, okay? At least. That's what I can remember off the top of my head. Rishi Sunak cannot afford to. The reason why Boris Johnson got away with it is because he was ahead in the polls. So he was playing a defensive game. He just had to not mess up. He didn't have to take the initiative. Rishi Sunak is going to go into the election behind in the polls, very possibly well behind in the polls. If he hides away, he won't improve those poll ratings. So if he does dodge any TV debates, and you can't rule it out, but if he does, that's a bad strategic move because he'll be looking, because people like it will already have a fairly dim view of Sunak and his Conservatives. So when Labour start attacking him for running scared by not turning up to the interviews and the debates, that will bite. That will affect those swing voters. They'll go, yeah, he's not. They will, because they want to know. They want to know who to vote for, and they will feel very poorly done by a prime minister, a political leader who refuses to answer their questions. So he cannot really afford to dodge. Every TV debate or interview he dodges will cost him votes. Because apart from anything else, Keir Starmer will be absolutely making sure he's on it to present Labour. I mean, the messaging has not been great on a lot of things, but he will be absolutely making sure that he is on point with it. Plum Duff, £5. Thank you very much. You're a good man, Phil. I do try. Anyway, Darian's saying that I'll be glad when Sunak has enough time on his hands to go to Marks and Sparks and buy trousers all the way down to his ankles. Yeah, I don't pick on things like that. I mean, people used to do it with Boris Johnson's hair as well. You know, occasionally you pick fun of it, but at the end of the day, there's far more. He can actually literally dress in a clown suit for all I care. I will happily support a prime minister who dresses in a clown suit every day, as long as they actually do their job. What I take offense to is when they wear smart tailored suits and behave like a clown. Rejoining March and September, guys, try to attend and reverse the bloody Brexit. Yes, indeed. I mean, anytime, not everyone can attend these things, but every opportunity, I think, every opportunity you get to be countered is always worth it, even if it seems to be ignored. And you know, one way to be countered is turn up to a rally. You can't always get there, or you don't always have the time. Joining organizations, because if an organization represents 20,000 members, okay, it represents 20,000 members. If it represents 100,000 members, that's like a political party. So like if the European movement had 100,000 members, all of a sudden that's on the level of a political party, a major political party at that. So, you know, that's what people can do. Not everyone can do any of those things because it does cost to be a member of a group. But anyone, yeah, just find ways to be counted for whatever cause you believe in, whether it is joining a group, because the higher their membership, the more, you know, the higher the profile they will have, because they represent more people. Or actually turning up to events as well, because when they're reported on, because I'll tell you something, I mean, it's not going to happen. It is going to be huge, but the huger the better. If the Rejoin March, for example, had hardly anyone turn up, it'll be reported on then. I'll bet you anything it'll be reported on then. And it'll be reported on, oh, the Rejoin campaign seems to have disappeared up its own arsehole. The reason it won't be reported on is because it'll be massive. But the bigger it is, at least when you can get people forcing it into the media at some point, like even if at some point in the future, somehow someone gets interviewed on television or something, they can say our last March had 200,000 people there. You know, that's quite powerful. So for people who can get there. But there we go. But that goes for anything as well. I mean, my big things are going to be Brexit, but also proportional representation. There are lots of political causes I would get behind, but those are the two biggest, because with those two, a lot of the rest of it comes naturally anyway, in my view anyway. How much longer do we think the Tories will blunder around in their fog of ineptitude? Well, okay, so the problem is in terms of when the election is going to be, if that's what that question was about. Right now, we cannot have a general election because the Tories are going to get spanked. So they won't trigger it now. Which probably means they'll keep leaving it until they're not going to get spanked anymore, which might mean it ends up being quite late, but there it is. In terms of the last one, it says, what's the largest Rejoin group? So in terms of where you'll do most good, I don't want to like piss off some groups by saying, by not mentioning, but I'm going to mention two main ones, right? One is the European movement, because that's fairly sizable, but if it could become really big, they would be able to get themselves on the media. They will be able to get themselves on the media. And the second one is party political, and it is the Labour movement for Europe, not because it's huge, but because if it had way more members, it would be more influential in the party. I did a stream a couple of weeks ago about the Labour campaign for electoral reform. So there's various groups inside Labour, right? And the larger their memberships, the more influential they are with it, because they have access to the Labour leadership. They get to make arguments, right? So if the Labour campaign for electoral reform got way more members, if you just, and it costs like £1 a month, it's like £10 a year to join, all of us, it's helpful. You don't have to be a Labour member, but the Labour leadership are interested in Labour members of it. If their membership exploded, all of a sudden they would have a lot more influence with the Labour leadership. They'd have more meetings and so on. They'd get to make their arguments. The same applies for the Labour movement for Europe. If their membership were to explode, say, because loads of people suddenly joined it, they represent more. This is mostly for Labour members, but, you know, so internally, they are the best one. If you want to like influence Labour policy regarding, for example, Brexit, and you're in the Labour Party, join the Labour movement for Europe. Outside of the Labour Party, the European movement is probably the best one to load up a load of members on. There are other organisations like the National Rejoin March to donate to if you can and attend events to. But the European movement, if we could massively boost membership of that, would make a big difference. Because the more, you know, if they can turn up to BBC, say we represent 100,000 members, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, you know. But there you go. David saying, Phil, will you go to the march? Is it in London? I don't like London. I don't like London. If I was still living there, I would go for sure. You don't like London and you used to live there? Oh, my goodness. No, I just don't like London. And I don't live anywhere near it, but I will be going. I'll just be sat at the back. I'm not speaking this year. Just sat at the back. Last one before we finish. Scoopnum, a final £2 super chat. Thank you very much. But there we go. We will be talking more about the Rejoin March inevitably as we get close to the time as well. But thanks for coming on, everyone. Don't forget to click the like button and subscribe to the channel. And details for Patreon, if you wish to join Graham on his James O'Brien watch, which is very exciting yesterday, then check out the description below. I'll try and remember to make sure we put a link to the interview or the report on the interview with Rishi Sunak as well. Have a very good day, and until next time, I shall see you later.